And welcome in here to the Hustle Show podcast, another Hustle Short on this Friday, September 15th, as we get set for week 3 in college football, week 2 in the NFL. I'm Mark Zinno. Thanks for joining us here on Wager Talk TV and the Wager Talk YouTube channel. Joined by my good buddy, Brian Power. Follow him on Twitter and X at Brian Power Wins. Brian Power underscore wins, Brian Power underscore wins. Where's your underscore, Brian?
The underscore is between the power and the wins. You got it right there, buddy.
There you go. It's the only perfect place it belongs for you, Brian Power.
Yes.
That's where it is.
Hey-o.
I'm at Mark. Welcome in. Happy Friday, everybody. We get set for another weekend of college football and the NFL. This week, Brian and I will take a look at two different facets. One, we are staying with our games that people nobody's talking about, but people should. So we'll each have a game there. But also, a lot of games on the card in college this week are either sort of classic sandwich spots or look-ahead spots. So we will take a look at some games from that perspective as well that may get you tripped up, given the big names that are playing here in week 3 of college football. And I'll start here with Brian Power tells me don't say it. It gets him upset. But the Ohio State Buckeyes. He's from Ohio, and he doesn't want to hear the Ohio State Buckeyes. Classic look-ahead spot for them as they take on Western Kentucky. They welcome the Hilltoppers to the Horseshoe. But next week, looming, they're going to have a date with Notre Dame in South Bend. Notre Dame takes on Central Michigan, so, kind of similar spots for them. But, Ohio State must have had this date circled on their calendar very early on. Because, again, this is a situation where Ohio State is laying a huge number. Minus 27.5, opened up at minus 28. It's been bought down to minus 27.5. And here's what's tricky about this game for Ohio State. Couple of things. One, the Buckeyes offense this year, despite averaging 300 yards passing per game, they're only scoring 30 points per game, and they're only converting 29.1% of their third down conversions on the season. That's a 16% drop from where they finished last year at 45%. So clearly, this is not the same Ohio State offense with C.J. Stroud at the helm. Kyle McCord now running the offense. He hasn't been terrible, but he certainly hasn't been great. The passing yards that are there has not translated into points. And this is an Ohio State team that is going to face a Hilltoppers team that has a good pass defense, only allowing 3 passing touchdowns on the season. I know the matchup doesn't necessarily lend to Western Kentucky being able to keep up. But here's the real rub for the Buckeyes in this spot, and it's about the Hilltoppers offense and why they think they can cover this game. The Buckeyes defense, despite the fact that they are a very good run defense this year and a good pass defense, they got to keep up with a team in Western Kentucky that loves to play pace. They try to score fast. They're second in the nation in passing yards last season. They're 12th in the nation in passing yards to start this year. The biggest issue for Western Kentucky, every time they've had to step up in class, they've sort of been outclassed. But nonetheless, I don't trust this Ohio State offense here to cover this number. I think that this is a game that it sort of correlates that if it stays under, it works in Western Kentucky's favor because Ohio State to cover this big number has got to score. They've also got to limit Western Kentucky to a number somewhere around 10 or 13. I don't think they do. I think Western Kentucky can score here, get you into the high teens, maybe even up to 20, and that should be enough to keep an Ohio State offense that, again, is only averaging 30 points a game to under 40. I think the game stays under, but I think Western Kentucky covers the 27.5 here in this look-ahead spot for Ohio State.
Yeah, I just want to ask you one follow-up, Mark, because you mentioned a couple things. One, there's a lot of teams in look-ahead spots this week, or sandwich spots. We'll get to another just in a minute. But you talk about Notre Dame specifically. Obviously, if Ohio State's in a look-ahead spot, so is Notre Dame, the team they play. Is there a reason that you would target this game, Ohio State, Western Kentucky, more so than the Notre Dame Central Michigan game? Because Notre Dame, obviously, in the look-ahead as well.
I mean, simply put, Central Michigan's offense stinks and Western Kentucky's doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what it boils down to.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the Hilltoppers, again, talk about their pace. They were top 10 in the nation in plays per game last year. So when they get the ball, they move and they move fast. And that's not that Ohio State can't stop them, but you look at this offense and what they're designed to do and how well they throw the ball, it's going to give Ohio State a little bit of a test here. I mean, as long as the turnovers aren't prevalent, right, for Western Kentucky and they're not making mistakes in the passing game, I'm confident they're going to get 2 touchdowns in here, maybe even throw a field goal in there. I think that's where they kind of end. And I would argue that as far as the total is concerned, 24 is the key number for this thing to stay under. If Ohio State can limit Western Kentucky to under 24, which I think they'll do, the game will stay under because I don't think Ohio State is scoring more than 40 if they score 40. They're just not an offense. And part of this, too, BP, may be this, that Ohio State is deliberately not putting anything on tape this week because they have Notre Dame next week, right? There is a, hey, this is going to be our first legit opponent that we're going to face. Let's not show them all our cards in the game before we play them.
Yeah, sounds good to me. I absolutely agree. I think this is the better one to target if people are looking. I just wanted to bring that up because people are like, well, hey, what about Notre Dame if they're in the look ahead spot? I think this is the better one to target. But you know what, Mark? I'll raise your look ahead to a just good old fashioned sandwich spot this week because my look ahead team is Ole Miss. And I just want to fade Ole Miss here based on the situation. Not only do they have Alabama on deck, and in Oxford, I'm telling you, they think they can beat Alabama this year, okay? But Ole Miss last week, they are coming off a win over a ranked Tulane team as well. The Lane train probably did not deserve to cover. I know you were very happy that they did, Mark. You had
Yes.
Ole Miss in that game, but the Rebels were down at halftime. It was tied in the third quarter, but they get a late 56-yard field goal and then a fumble return for touchdown to cover every number. Because remember, that number got bet way up when it was announced Tulane quarterback Michael Pratt was out. So they struggled, admittedly, on the road to beat a Tulane team that did not have its starting quarterback. And now Alabama on deck in a huge SEC West showdown. So I love the spot Georgia Tech is in, getting 17.5 in Oxford on Saturday. Again, I don't expect Kiffin, just like you talked about with Ohio State, to show a lot on tape for Alabama. Because remember, there's obviously a knowledge between Kiffin and Saban. They worked together. Kiffin also worked with Georgia Tech head coach Brent Key once upon a time as well. So there's a familiarity there. Kiffin has struggled as a large favorite of 17 or more. 7-12-1 against the number, 3-9-1 when facing a non-conference opponent. I think that's good news for a Georgia Tech program, Mark, that is on the upswing under Brent Key. Remember, they got off to a terrible start last year, which included a 42-0 loss to Ole Miss. But he kind of righted the ship, and they've played a lot better since he became the head coach. I thought they should have beat Louisville in the opener. They had more total yards in that game, held the Cardinals to 1 of 13 on third down. Oh, by the way, Ole Miss was 1 of 13 on third down last week. A confidence-building win last week for the Yellow Jackets over, admittedly, an FCS program, South Carolina State. But you win 48-13, you're feeling a little bit better about yourself. And I think the road dog can hang here. They're certainly going to be the more motivated team. You got to think the Ole Miss players and, dare I say, coaching staff are focused on Alabama next week. So Ole Miss is my look-ahead team here for the show today. I would take the points with Georgia Tech.
I'm with you situationally. My biggest concern is, well, there's several minor concerns, I should say. One, the line is oscillated back and forth between 20.5 to 19.5, back to 20. So we're seeing money come back and forth on both sides here. That always kind of just, sends a red flag up for me. Two, it's not the Georgia Tech offense I worry about being able to score on Ole Miss. It's their defense actually getting the requisite 2 or 3 stops that they're going to need to stay within this number. And then finally, as well as I do, Lane Kiffin has absolutely no regard for the scoreboard and the clock. It doesn't matter. When he has the ball, he's trying to score. And I don't want a garbage touchdown here in a 17-point game to end up to a 24-point game. That's the only thing. A situation, I agree with everything. It's just, those little things I can't sort of eliminate sort of scare me a little bit.
Yeah, and maybe this is a flawed way of thinking. Ole Miss got their late touchdown last week. To me, I'm actually are they really going to backdoor 2 games in a row? They could. I mean, there's no rule that they can't. Also, you talk about the Ole Miss offense and Georgia Tech's defense. Okay, are we a little scared that they can stop them? Ole Miss lost its top wide receiver last week. I would imagine that he could be. We don't have a definitive answer on Harris's status, but I would imagine he would either be held out or severely limited again with Alabama on deck. You're close to the SEC, Mark. You know what? Ole Miss believes they can win that game. I think they've got one eye, and some players probably have both eyes on that game next week.
And the crazy part is they believe it so much they can win it in Tuscaloosa of all places. This game isn't in Oxford next week. They got to go on the road to do it. So, but yeah, I mean, if Alabama was ever ripe for the picking, it's now. All right, from look ahead spots, sandwich spots to games that no one's talking about that they probably should be. I'll kick it off here with South Alabama and Oklahoma State here, BP. Now, the bottom line is Oklahoma State is not in a good place right now. I backed them last week and covered against Arizona State, but that was more of a fade of Arizona State and how bad they are. That's probably going to be a 3-win team this year, if that, now that Colorado is actually a good football team. But the Jaguars of South Alabama, this is an offense that's not to be underestimated here. They averaged 415 yards per game last season. They're close to averaging 400 on the year so far. Carter Bradley, their quarterback, returns 9 starters. He was one of 9 starters returning from the 10-win team last year. They average over 160 rushing yards per game. They're paced by Damian Webb, their running back, over 1,000 yards last year. And they lose that first game that you and I think were both on against Tulane. It was a 10-7 game in the second quarter. Their defense then gave up 3 huge touchdown passes, all of them over 45 yards or more. I would normally worry about the back end of their defense after watching that, but this is an Oklahoma State offense that I don't think can take advantage. We'll get to them in just a moment. The Jaguars are converting 56% of their third down conversions on the year. They're averaging 6 yards per play. Oklahoma State's defense hasn't really faced a real offense this year, despite, again, already facing a Power 5 opponent. The Jaguars play with pace. They were top 30 in plays per game last year. Carter Bradley, the quarterback, has to avoid the interception bug. If he doesn't turn the ball over here, he's going to be able to keep his team in this game. The Oklahoma State offense leaves a ton to be desired. You know the old adage, BP, that if you have 2 quarterbacks, you have none? Well, guess what?
Yeah.
Oklahoma State has 3 quarterbacks. Garrett Rangel,
and none of them are good.
Yeah, and Mike Gundy's son, Gunner. They're all splitting playing time, yet you said none of them are good. Despite playing 2 bad defenses, they're only averaging 378 yards of offense per game, which is third to last among Big 12 teams. And that's just a point of reference as everybody's playing non-conference teams right now. They're averaging just 5.1 yards per play and 9.5 yards per completion. That is a low number in college football. That 9.5 yards, 118th in the country. South Alabama's defense also returns 9 starters. They had a top 10 run defense last year. Granted, they play in a different conference, but no Cowboys running back this year actually has 100 yards through 2 games. So they're not running the ball well. They don't throw it all that well. We get the 7.5 here with South Alabama. A lot of people turned away from this game just because, again, Oklahoma State's not interesting. There's not much, excitement surrounding them. And South Alabama is not a team a lot of people know about. But the Jaguars here plus 7.5 in a game that no one's talking about, but probably should be.
Well, you talk about a game that no one's talking about, but probably should be. I really take this segment to heart, Mark, because how about we throw a little Liberty versus Buffalo on the screen here? I mean, not a game that anybody is probably talking about for sure. Liberty has opened by covering back-to-back games as a favorite, okay? And now they're laying a short number on the road to a Buffalo team that just lost to FCS Fordham. Remember the late 90s when we all had those FU hats? What a time to be alive that was. But I am backing Buffalo plus the points here, Mark, despite the fact they are off a outright loss to an FCS team. Liberty's 2 wins this year against Bowling Green and New Mexico State. Those were the 2 worst. I know they were both bowl teams, but they were the 2 worst bowl teams in America last year. Liberty benefited from a +6 turnover margin in those 2 games. Covering the number, not easy either time out. They were up 24-0 against Bowling Green early, and their defense let Bowling Green back in the game. A bad Bowling Green offense. Bowling Green, I know the MAC. Bowling Green's a lot worse than Buffalo. And then they needed a late field goal just to cover the spread in that game, did Liberty. Last week against New Mexico State, the Flames defense needed a key 4th down stop to preserve the cover. Both those games were at home, oh, by the way. Now they go on the road, and Buffalo is desperate, okay? They're 0-2. They've got back-to-back road games coming up after this. I know one of them is at Akron, but if Buffalo loses here, there's a good chance they could be 0-5 to start the year. Nobody wants to be 0-5. Nobody wants to be 0-2. So I like Buffalo here. I would sprinkle a little bit on the money line. Last year, Mark, Buffalo lost another FCS game to Holy Cross on a Hail Mary. What did they do the next week? They covered the spread on the road, tougher spot, 13-point dogs against Coastal Carolina. Wouldn't you know, Jamie Chadwell, now the coach at Liberty, was the coach of Coastal Carolina last year. So this is the second year in a row Chadwell's facing a Buffalo team that is off a loss to an FCS opponent. Buffalo's 22-13 against the number when catching 3 or more at home. So they've been very profitable in that role. This is, like I said, Liberty's first road game. And look, nobody wants any part of Buffalo because they lost to an FCS team, okay? But remember what they did in the first game. They hung with Wisconsin for a half. Liberty 2-6 against the spread as a road favorite, and again, a somewhat misleading margin of victory thus far. Give me the points. I talked about this game last night on the Hustle. It's a client play. I do think Buffalo likely wins it outright, but if you get 3 or better, that's the way to go.
Well, there'll at least be one Buffalo team that doesn't embarrass themselves this weekend. So there is that. Hey-o. That's the Buffalo Bills. Thank you for not covering that number, Buffalo. All right. That'll do it for us here on this Hustle Short. Make sure you guys, again, every Thursday night, 7 p.m. Eastern, tune into the Hustle Show podcast in its full entirety to check out all the great content that we have there. Like and subscribe to the Wager Talk YouTube channel. Follow him on Twitter. He's at BrianPower_wins. I'm at Mark Zinno, MarkZinno. Check out both of our pages at Wager Talk and Sports Memo, respectively, for all of our client plays as well. Appreciate you guys tuning in. Enjoy the rest of Friday and the college football and NFL football weekend coming up. For Brian Power, I'm Mark Zinno. Thanks for joining us here on the Hustle Short on the Hustle Show podcast. Have a great day.